Hey everybody, quick update from the editor's room before the video gets started. One thing that I wanted to let everybody know is that I did actually start a Discord server for the YouTube channel, so if you're interested, I'm going to be leaving a link in the description and also in a pinned comment down below. So check that out and join our little community, our little burgeoning community, if you're interested in chatting about Arcane and specifically about Redfall. There's going to be a lot of discussion about that closer to the launch of the game. Also, by the time you're listening to this, hopefully one of two things has happened with my 2-year-old son. He's either recovered from being super sick, as he's been kind of sick over the past week as of the time of me recording this, or he's still going to be sick and I'm still going to have to be caring for him, one of those two, but just wanted to let you guys know. So anyway, enough of my rambling, on to the video. As of the time of me writing out this script, the embargo has lifted on the first impressions for Redfall, and many different content creators and gaming media outlets are expressing their thoughts and initial reactions after having spent some time playing the game. There were two separate events for Redfall hosted here in the US, one in Los Angeles on the West Coast, and the other hosted in New York City on the East Coast. Bethesda had actually invited me to the New York event for Redfall, which is crazy because it means that I'm slowly becoming a large enough channel to capture Bethesda's attention. I was unfortunately unable to attend the event, however, due to my wife and son getting super sick here at home, and family is always going to come first. Still, if anyone from Bethesda is watching this video, I want to say thank you for extending an invitation to me. It really meant a lot. In any case, many other content creators and influencers were able to attend these events and play around 90 minutes of Redfall, experiencing firsthand what the gameplay, open world exploration, and narrative tone had to offer. I am so pleased to report that the reactions from those who played Redfall early have been largely positive, with many aspects of the game being praised, but in particular, the first-person gunplay and combat, the design of the open world and density of content, as well as the single-player experience compared to co-op play. The portion of the game that these content creators and influencers were able to play was strictly a solo affair, which shows to me personally just how confident Arcane Studios and Bethesda are about Redfall as a single-player game, and not just a co-op game with a single-player mode included as an afterthought. This is huge because up until this point, everyone kind of assumed that the co-op would overshadow the traditional single-player focus that has been Arcane's bread and butter for quite some time now, but we were all proven wrong if these first impressions are anything to go by. But enough of my rambling, let's see what everyone is actually saying about Redfall so far. Let's start with what IGN had to say about Redfall during their time with the game. In a game all about vampire slaying, it's pretty important that killing your blood-feasting foes feels like an event in and of itself. That's exactly what Arcane Austin has done with Redfall. Much like how assassination sim Dishonored had gloriously bloody backstab animations, Redfall revels in the act of plunging a wooden stake through a vampire's heart. There's weight in the blow as you knock your foe backwards and slam them into the floor, pushing a boot into a jaw that quickly evaporates into fiery dust. Yeah, killing vampires in Redfall feels good. Well, it's great to know that the act of actually fighting and killing vampires feels good to play, and this reinforces one of the general takeaways that people had from their hands-on time with the game. The combat has weight to it, while also feeling fluid and responsive. The rest of the article provides some interesting info, particularly in regards to the main story mission that many had the opportunity to play through, but what stood out to me here was the mention of the side content that helps to fill in the world and give the player other interesting things to do outside of the main story. As you'd expect from a game in this genre, there's a whole bunch of things to do beyond the main storyline. There are multiple safe houses to unlock, each of which becomes an ammunition stockpile style and fast travel location. There are activities which help pull neighborhoods back from full vampire infestation, such as wiping out cultist rallies or preventing a powerful creature emerging from its blood amber cocoon. Then there are errand-like side quests that appear to be peppered with arcane Easter eggs, such as one where you head off to find whiskey and cigars. But the best side activities are the strangest ones, at least from the small sample I've seen so far. Vampire nests transport you into a twisted psychic realm where you must destroy a room-sized heart and then claim as much treasure as possible before the entire place collapses around you like some kind of blood-splattered game show. Back in the town, you're frequently reminded that the vampire gods are watching you, and if you cause too much trouble, they'll send an incredible Hulk-like freak to beat 7 bells out of you in a battle played out beneath a wild electrical storm. The repeating nature of open world tasks feels completely at odds with Arcane's typically handcrafted approach, but it's in these two activities that I saw a glimmer of how the studio is rethinking the building blocks of the genre to make them feel more systemic or novel. The whiskey and cigars running joke will never get old. I'm sorry, it's just too funny that Arcane are self-aware enough to center an entire side quest around it. The vampire nests are also highlighted as one of, if not the, most entertaining and intriguing piece of side content. It's really cool to also hear IGN pretty much confirm what I had thought Arcane would do with the traditional open world formula: inject more simulated/systemic aspects into it, making it an almost complete reinvention of what an open world can be. Another major takeaway that everyone seemed to share during their time playing Redfall is that stealth is far less of a focus here than it has been in previous Arcane games, specifically Dishonored. Stealth in Redfall is more of a means to an end instead of a truly valid playstyle from the sound of it, as you will eventually be pushed into open combat in most scenarios, even though you can use a stealthy approach to establish an effective ambush ahead of time. The other area in which traditional open world shooter design is at odds with Arcane's legacy is stealth. To be clear, stealth is a component of Redfall, but it adheres to a very different rulebook than that used by Dishonored. Sneaking flows between regular bursts of violent, chaotic conflict, and that's okay. Dishonored was Arcane's interpretation of pure stealth classics like Thief, but the studio's touchstones for Redfall are very different. Before my demo began, co-director Harvey Smith name-checked Far Cry 2 and Stalker as influences, two shooters from an experimental period years before the likes of Gearbox and Ubisoft established the largely unwavering open-world FPS formula. If Arcane Austin can bring its own version of the kind of innovation those games did back in the late 2000s, then Redfall could well inject a static genre with some long overdue excitement. The fact that Stalker and Far Cry 2 have been repeatedly name-dropped by Harvey Smith as major points of influence and inspiration for Redfall is a huge deal, especially for me, as I personally consider Far Cry 2 to be my favorite game in that series, before Ubisoft tainted it by releasing Far Cry 3 several times in a row, just with a different skin attached to it. I've never played the Stalker games, but I've always heard great things about the unique setting and gameplay. The point is that the team at Arcane are taking inspiration for the open world and the activities contained within from the best sources, as opposed to some of the more mediocre open world titles that have been released within the past decade. Moving on, this is what Gamespot had to say about their time with Redfall. Arcane Studios is known for a very specific kind of game, immersive sims. The team made its mark on the industry with intricate sandboxes that feature systems and mechanics interacting with each other in fascinating ways. Games like Dishonored and Dishonored 2 are standout examples of why the developer is heralded as a master of the genre. But in recent years, the studio has started to reassess what it means to be an Arcane game. Prey, while still a science fiction take on the immersive sim genre, served as the foundation for Mooncrash, a DLC that reconfigured the game into a roguelike. Deathloop leaned harder into that genre by embracing the run-based format to break down what makes an immersive sim so compelling and asking the player to examine the pieces and put them back together. Redfall continues this process of reflection and reinvention, and it's perhaps the biggest departure from what we expect an Arcane game to be. But after getting some hands-on time with the game, it quickly became apparent that underneath the open-world, first-person shooting, and loot, there are systems, mechanics, and gameplay opportunities that are unmistakably Arcane. It's great to hear that underneath all of these, what some may consider quote-unquote generic gameplay systems, Redfall is immediately recognizable as an Arcane game, complete with their solid design foundation that they've built up over the past 20 years. Some worried that the secret sauce that makes an Arcane game so special would be watered down by the seemingly rote mechanics and ideas they've introduced into Redfall, such as the open world, the loot, and the first-person gunplay, but it sounds like this is definitely not the case. I was surprised by how solid the first-person shooting felt. Although Arcane's previous games are built around first-person shooter dynamics, in terms of pace and intensity, these games have always been atypical, especially in comparison to the likes of Call of Duty or Destiny. But Redfall's shooting feels like it's in a good place, with weapons that provide satisfying feedback and have a heft to them. Pistols range from quick and snappy for when I was trying to stay on the move, to punchy when I needed to clear out a room. Sniper rifles were precise and took a decent chunk off health bars when aiming for the head, and assault rifles felt suited to crowd control and getting into the thick of the battle. Coupled with the various abilities characters have, there was a good back and forth dynamic between guns and powers that kept me engaged. Again, great to hear that the moment-to-moment act of shooting vampires and cultists feels great, with satisfying weapon feedback both visually and audibly. The influence of machine games, and in particular id Software, are going to be felt very strongly in the final release, I'm sure. The writer of the article goes on to talk about the sense of place in Redfall's setting, something that Arcane have always excelled in when designing their unique worlds. When it comes to finding examples of that Arcane magic in this game, based on what I saw thus far, the world itself is a pretty good indicator. Like Dunwall, Karnaca, Talos 1, and Black Reef before it, Redfall has a distinct sense of place that merges the mundane with the monstrous to create a setting that feels grounded but also fantastical. At first blush, there's a beauty to Redfall that is inviting. It has a rustic autumnal vibe that is almost picturesque, but then you look a little closer and notice how it has been corrupted. Perpetual darkness that is only alleviated by the faint light emanating from an oppressed sun. People who have thrown away their humanity in hopes that they'll be selected to ascend to vampiredom. Powerful vampires menacingly gliding around and occasionally unexpectedly teleporting. The Rook is also mentioned in great detail here, with the comparisons to the Nightmare from Prey already giving me chills about how those encounters could play out. There's also a threat level that slowly rises as you clean the area up, and if you attract the attention of a district's vampire ruler, it sends in a character called the Rook. This character functions a lot like the Nightmare from Prey. It appears in a dramatic lightning storm and is a hulking bullet sponge of a vampire that feels impossible to kill, and worse still, attracts other vampires to your location. This dynamic means that you need to be careful about how you approach certain areas and manage how much heat you're drawing. In my playtime, I found myself being judicious about which fights I took on, occasionally choosing to use Devinder's teleportation ability to get onto rooftops to skirt around gangs of cultists, or stealthing my way through vampire-infested territory. Again, it remains to be seen whether this push and pull power struggle is enough to keep tedium at bay. The area I played was quite large, but was only the tutorial area, akin to Breath of the Wild's Great Plateau, so some visual variety is likely as more of the map opens up. My main concern going into Redfall was that it'd be another looter shooter in the mold of what everyone thinks is popular, and, in the process, lose what makes Arcane's games special. My time with the game brought some much needed clarity to what Redfall actually is, and it is a looter shooter in the mold of popular titles like Borderlands, but most importantly, at its core, are design ideas that have enabled memorable exploration and narrative, as well as satisfying gameplay in Arcane's previous games. But just because it's there doesn't mean it'll it'll work, and moving into the open-world looter-shooter genre is a big pivot for the studio. As a fan of Arkane's work, I am more intrigued by it now, and regardless of how it comes together, it'll be an interesting and distinct take on the genre at the very least. This last paragraph is important here because it does reinforce the possibility that all of these seemingly disparate elements being brought together in Redfall won't quite work out or mesh together the way that Arkane had planned. The idea of being disappointed by what the game has to offer is a scary one, but we should still keep it in the back of our minds ahead of launch. Next up is Gamesradar and their impressions from the hands-on gameplay session. While this can be played as a co-op shooter, I'm playing alone, and it works beautifully. I don't get a chance to try the other characters, but Devinder's power set defines my experience in a way that makes me think each option will be worth a playthrough in their own right. There's a telekinetic character, a techie one with a robot, and stealthy sniper type, all with interesting abilities that, even if they work half as well, could still carry the game. I can only guess what the multiplayer interplay of powers would feel like, but I suspect it's going to be hugely entertaining to mix it all together. Important to once again note that co-op was not a part of this gameplay event. Everyone was playing strictly solo, and it sounds like there is enough distinction between each of the 4 playable characters that playing through the game as all 4 in a solo playthrough will provide very different experiences. Never mind the fact that co-op will feel wholly unique with the different ability combos that can be employed by a group of 4 players. It's been incredibly reassuring to hear another of the major takeaways from the event being that the single-player experience of Redfall has not been compromised in any way, and in fact sounds like it might be the preferred method of playing the game if you are a die-hard fan of Arkane's traditionally slow and exploratory solo experiences. The article continues by elaborating on the quote-unquote secret sauce that makes Arkane's games so special and how that feels here in Redfall. What I find interesting as I shoot and scout my way to a mission marker is just how much this feels like an Arkane game while still being an open-world looter shooter. There are crates and bags full of green, blue, and purple weapon variants, for example, but it doesn't feel too in your face. There are just some better guns around if you stop to look. It just plays like an Arkane game that has those elements included. There are also some moments that are so Arkane it almost feels like an Easter egg, like grave keys that open special loot chests and recount sad little tales when you collect them. The cadence and tone of the voice that speaks is 100% channeling the heart from Dishonored. However, the Arkane feeling really comes to the fore when I finally reach the house I'm meant to investigate to find out more about the vampire's origins. Having zigzagged between all sorts of interesting distractions to get here, my destination immediately has a big set-piece vibe. First, I have to scout the grounds to find a way in, avoiding watcher vamps that act like security cameras from high up roofs. I find a rear window and choose that because you never use the front door in games like this. Arkane are the masters of modern level design, and I'll gladly debate anyone who says otherwise. One of the things that make their environments so fun to navigate are the many different routes you can take to get to your objective, or in this case, to simply just enter a building. What impressed me the most with the time I had with Redfall is how well it mixes the familiar feeling format of its open world with Arkane flair. The supernatural, spooky ambiance shines through, making even basic objectives feel unpredictable while throwing out surprises just when you think you have a handle on what to expect. I saw enough creative and atmospheric twists here and there to keep me genuinely excited for what might come next. If that's indicative of the game overall, then I can't wait to fully explore what the town has to offer. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, most of the people who managed to get hands-on time with Redfall came away with very optimistic expectations of what the game will offer once it releases. Not everyone was so enthusiastic though about their experience, and while I do prefer to keep my coverage of games, especially Arkane games, as positive as possible, I feel it would be unfair of me to not include at least one negative impression of the game, so as to show that we should keep all opinions in our minds as we approach May 2nd. Our last article comes from PC Gamer, who were incredibly critical critical of their experience with Redfall. It's a sharply rendered world, but from a studio as stylish as Arcane, it does feel like it's missing something. Deathloop, and particularly Dishonored, are wonderfully striking to look at, with such rich environmental world building. Their settings are instantly memorable. Redfall feels mundane by comparison. Despite the vampire threat, predominantly what you're looking at is normal present-day buildings and streets, and the art style, though colorful and pleasant, isn't distinctive enough to elevate them. As I start to explore, that feeling is compounded by the strange lifelessness of the town. Before my session, Harvey Smith is keen to emphasize that I don't have to follow the main plot. I can just wander and see what I discover. But when I give that a try, what I find is not a lot. There are little groups of enemies standing around in various spots, ready to come after me if I stray too close, but there's precious little to really interact with. Almost all the buildings I poke around inside are simply bare. No items to pick up, nothing to see, no signs of life other than bloodsuckers and cultists. It's a far cry from the intricate dioramas of Dishonored. The writer of the article came away from their time playing Redfall with the impression that the open world feels rather devoid of life, and also that the game simply lacks a fantastical element to the visual design, which is part of the reason why games like Dishonored and Deathloop stand out so much in the gaming landscape. Redfall seems to be more of a traditional setting that doesn't have the same level of exaggerated visual style comparable to Arcane's previous games. The article goes on to describe the poor enemy AI, another seemingly common takeaway from the hands-on impressions, as well as the feeling that the combat does not provide much mental stimulation or even require much thought from the player. In combat, the shooting feels good, and there's a nice selection of guns to choose from, including more esoteric options like a stake launcher and a UV beam, but enemies don't put up an interesting fight, and there seems to be little strategic meat. There's stealth, and you can approach enemy encampments from different angles, but none of it really adds up to much more depth than shooting explosive barrels when cultists stand conveniently next to them. The vampires are the worst offenders. Floating menacingly in the air and rushing at me to claw me, they at first seem thrilling, but once I pump a few shotgun blasts into them, I realize how weightless they really are. Easy to put down, feral in their behavior, and usually found just kind of aimlessly hanging about with cultists, they have none of the grandeur or menace you want from a supernatural foe like this. They feel more like flying attack dogs. Once downed with a few shots, they flop helplessly to the ground, where you have to stake them to finish them off. It should be a cathartic moment. Take that, you creature of the night. But they're such limp enemies that it feels more like having to clean up after yourself. Damn, this guy really did not enjoy playing Redfall. But he does bring up some valid concerns though. Hopefully by the time the full game releases, Arcane will have had some more time to polish up the AI and make it a bit more challenging, but the odds seem to be stacked against them at this point since we're only a few short weeks from launch. The last anecdote to share from this article is the author's concerns about co-op play, and how playing through the full game with a group of 4 players might not feel that much better than the seemingly miserable solo experience that he had. As I end my time with the game, I'm left wondering how much my adventure was hobbled by my lack of co-op buddies. With enemy numbers and difficulty scaled up, would fights feel more dangerous and exciting? Would synergy between our abilities open up more strategic options? Would multiplayer chaos fill the strange emptiness at the heart of this world? But at the same time, I can already see the problems I'd be running into in co-op. With such a go anywhere, do anything structure, won't multiplayer sessions feel loose and aimless? Without properly paced encounters and climactic moments, how can co-op play settle into a satisfying rhythm? Redfall feels quiet and empty alone, but I'm not sure it's a world I'm keen to pull my friends into either. From what I've seen, it seems less like a game you can play however you want, and more the worst of both worlds. Developed during the pandemic and other change and upheaval at the studio, and surely shaped by Arcane's struggle to find mainstream commercial success with its excellent immersive sims, Redfall seems to me to bear the scars of a troubled development. I can only hope I didn't get to see its best side, but all I can say is that after an hour and a half with its vampire enemies, not once did it get my blood pumping. Pretty harsh words to end on, but like I mentioned, I think it's only fair to include a dissenting opinion here with regards to the first impressions of Redfall. In any case, these were just a few of the opinions that were shared publicly about the game. There are plenty of others who have interesting thoughts to share about their time playing Redfall, but But most importantly, what do you think about the first reactions to the game? Do these gameplay previews instill optimism for the game or pessimism? Will you be waiting to try the game after the final reviews drop? Comment down below and let's start a discussion. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like on the video and share it around with other members of the Bethesda and Arcane community. It really helps the channel to grow and get noticed. Consider subscribing to the channel for even more Redfall content to come in the future, and be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember that the outsider walks among us. Thanks for watching, everyone.